Shabbat Shalom, my friends, and Chag Samayach. What a wonderful combo. Sabbath and festival all together, bundled together. But before we begin, a word of profound sorrow for the fiery destruction that was visited upon Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris this week. I've contacted Catholic friends these past several days to express my profound regrets, most especially as Catholics around the world this very week are observing Holy Week leading up to Easter. But the damage visited upon the cathedral touches many others of us who have entered that building as visitors and not as worshipers, and sense there the powerful physical presence of holiness and of spiritual aspiration, and yes, of pure beauty. So the cathedral will be rebuilt. Yes, it will be restored to a newer, still transcendent beauty, but nothing will ever repair or replace the reminder that we have received this week as to what is truly permanent and what is impermanent in our universe. The human spirit can and will rise again out of the ashes, like the phoenix rises out of the flames. That's our first message for today. The human spirit will rise again. The Torah reading for this Shabbat Yom Tov, of course, falls out of the normal cycle. We're asked to read Exodus chapter 12, verses 21 to 51, and Numbers 28, 19 to 25. They were selected by the rabbis because they relate to the observance of Passover, Pesach. The Exodus passage gives the first clear details about how Passover is to be observed over the generations. No, there's no mention of the Manischewitz Haggadah. The Numbers passage describes the sacrifices that are to be brought on Passover. We are taught to encourage our children to ask questions. We are taught to invite strangers to our celebration of freedom. It's a second lesson for this week. Our questions are equal in importance to the answers we may find. Moving on. Rachel Korazim is more than just one of the premier teachers of Hebrew poetry in the world today, and more than just one of the great teachers on the Shalom Hartman Institute faculty, and more than just one of my favorite instructors. Dr. Korazim has the uncanny ability to discover the context out of which modern Hebrew poetry arises. And thus, she opens the doors to permit the poet's intentions to flow into our souls. What a gift she has. What follows in this posting is Rachel Korazim's teaching about a very familiar Seder song, Chag Gadya, the only kid, Chad Gadya. Let me set the scene. Every Friday in pre-state Palestine, Natan Alterman published a poem in the Devar newspaper. In 1944, like this year, Passover was on a Friday evening. It therefore made sense that Alterman published a poem that year about the kid from the Haggadah, Chad Gadya. Near the end of that poem, Alterman wrote, "They stood on the last page of the Haggadah, hugging and pressed to the wall." Strange words, disquieting words. What did Alterman know that day in 1944 that we should know today? He knew that exactly 1 year before, Erev Pesach 1943, the Warsaw Ghetto uprising had begun. He knew that 3 weeks before this poem was published, the Nazis had invaded Hungary. He knew that 2 days before his poem was published, an edict was proclaimed in Hungary that the Jews there had to wear the yellow star. Korazim asks, was this poem a premonition out of what is yet to happen in the coming weeks? Or is it perhaps just an expression of fear and concern for what appeared to be the last living Jews in Europe? It has been 75 years since Alterman published this poem. By now, we know the date of Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, has been moved onto the date in which the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising started. And today, once again, we are witnessing, unfortunately, the rise of an ultra-nationalist, anti-Semitic, right-wing government back there in Hungary. Alterman's poem initially sounds like a gentle, sweet retelling of Chad Gadya, until it doesn't. Listen to what I have chosen to be our sacred text for today. He stood there in the market among the goats and billy goats, swinging its tail, as small as a pinky, a goat from a poor home, a kid for 2 zuzim. With no adornments, no bell and no ribbon, no one paid him any attention, so no one knew, not the goldsmiths, not the wool combers, that this kid will enter the Haggadah and become the hero of the song. But father approached, his face aglow, and bought the kid and caressed its forehead. And this is the start of one of the songs that will be sung forever. The kid licked father's hand with its tongue and touched it with his wet nose. This, my brother, was the first rhyme of the verse Dezabin Abba that Dad bought. It was a spring day, and the wind was dancing. Girls were laughing with twinkling eyes, and father and the kid entered the Haggadah, and both just stood there. That very same Haggadah was already full with wonders and great miracles. Therefore, they stood on the last page, hugging and pressed to the wall. That very same Haggadah then silently said, "Good, stand there, kid and father. In my pages walk smoke and blood." I am talking of greatness and secret things. Yet I know that the sea will not split in vain. There is a reason for splitting through walls and deserts. If at the end of the story stand a father and a kid waiting for their turn to shine. What have we learned from all of this? First, going back, that the human spirit can and does rise from the ashes and flames. Two, that one of the very first mitzvot connected with Passover in the Torah is the obligation to tell the stories of our past to our children. The best way to tell those stories is to create settings within which the children's natural curiosity causes them to ask questions. Why are things this way tonight and not any other way? Three, that every aspect of our people's history is a living history. We are the product of the stories we tell. We are the product of the stories we tell. Stories the joy of experiencing Torah, the power derived from believing that there is meaning to our existence, the acknowledgement of love's healing power, the spiritual sustenance we derive from living in community. 4, we learn that the acknowledgement of the persistence of evil is not a surrender to the dark side, but rather that by telling our stories again and again, we are empowered by our faith and our joy and our wisdom from all that these stories contain. We are the stories we tell. And our 5th lesson: it is a privilege and an obligation to leave the Seder singing the old and so wonderfully familiar songs of hope and of restoration. The father, Abba, and Chad Gadya, that kid, are still awaiting the day when their deliverance becomes part of the Passover experience. We are not yet free. They are waiting for their deliverance, and so are we. L'shana haba'ah Yerushalayim habenuyah, next year in the rebuilt Jerusalem. Have a wonderful Shabbat. Have a wonderful Yom Tov. And please hit share so that all who are hungry for Torah, kol dichvin, can come and sit at our table. Shabbat Shalom, Chag, Pesach, Samayach.